Peace, everyone. Welcome back to another show of BAP Talks with my brother here, Asafo Geechee, y'all. And today we have a esteemed guest, right? One of the people, and I said this on my post that I love being in a room where I'm the least smartest. We obviously know Asafo is 20 times smarter than me, but this brother is the same. And so I'm going to let him come and introduce himself, and then we'll definitely get started in the conversation for today. Yeah, go ahead.
Hey everyone, good evening to everyone. My name is Akwesi Prince Mensa, so it's always good to be in a room with like-minded brothers. I'm not too sure if I'm like smart or whatever. I just love when African people put their minds together. So I'm really happy to be here, and I've been really looking forward to this build. So yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. So, Brother Safa, tell the people what we're talking about today, and then we can get right into some conversation and questions. We'll have back and forth dialogue between me and Asafo. And then for the people who's watching on YouTube, Facebook, make sure you share, but also you can ask questions as well so that we can have a kind of a dialogue.
All right, so can everyone hear me? We're good?
Mm-hmm.
All right, good. So what we're going to be discussing today, we're going to be focused on educational policy and the nature of education in the midst or in the context, the political and social context of racial capitalism and decaying and declining empire. So we have some questions. We're going to go back and forth, and we'll hopefully, these questions can, kind of guide the discussion, a fuller discussion. But my first question, brother, I wanted to ask you about what your thoughts on about the increasingly virulent attack that we're seeing throughout the country on critical race theory. There's been more and more of a concerted effort on the part of reactionary segments of U.S. politics and the United States social leaders to criticize and even destroy any discussion in U.S. education of critical race theory and what have you. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, so that's really a good question. When it comes to critical race theory, I had to get really, really like educated on it. The way that critical race theory was kind of taught to me was in a way that it wasn't like more so like a critique against racial capitalism. I kind of see critical race theory as I now know it, thanks to Black Power media, really, and then of course reading more books and things like that on it written by Derek Bell. Is that it really is a critique on racial liberalism, right? So the idea of this thing of, meritocracy, kind of an idea thinking that, anyone can make it here. It's essentially what critical race theory does is that it really hides the fact that, this whole colorblind thing that we have here in the United States or whatever is just another veil, right? It is something that has very little substance, and it's really hiding the ways in which capital accumulation really works. So just as much as like what Karl Marx said, he says that the liberalism that that the United States has is a form of liberalism that is suitable to the expansion of capital, right? And so I think that there's a couple different layers that are kind of taking place within critical race theory, right? They do see it as a threat, right? Because it could eventually lead down to a deeper analysis on these class relation issues, right? And it will get to the idea of like, wow, we're really are being, definitely screwed here, right? I mean, so then there's that, right? But it's also like I'm been kind of really perplexed by the ways that at least critical theorists in academia are kind of talking about critical race theory as well, because they don't seem to talk about critical race theory as an actual critique on liberalism in connection with capitals. They don't even talking about it as if like it's a race is a systemic issue, right? But no one knows why it is, right? Like okay, like I always get really kind of frustrated when people say like, oh, systemic racism, we have to end systemic racism. Like these are more abstractions, it's it's racial capitalism, man. Like that's what it really comes down to. So why not we just call it that? But when I'm in the hallways or in the classrooms, at, many universities, oftentimes they don't talk about capitalist formations or anything else like that. It's just like, let's create a better, kinder form of racial capitalism. So even in how the public is reinterpret these things, they're talking about these things in terms of abstractions. It isn't really anything tied down to capitalist formations. And so that there's a problem with that too, in terms of like how people actually come to know what it is. And I think that's why at first I didn't really like critical race theory, because that's how it was honestly taught to me in my discipline. But it wasn't until I started listening to lectures and reading more about what Karl Marx had to say about how liberalism works in conjunction with capital. And then, of course, tying it into our experience, it's just, it's a threat to racial liberalism. And I had to really recenter critical race theory as an extension of the Black radical tradition, right? In the extension of, our analysis and, of how we come to know the nature of our oppression. So, I think we should definitely keep pushing the hammer on teaching critical race theory, but it has to be centered on a class thing, because otherwise people will fall into the thing of, we'll just make a better system of capitalism or something like that. And it's
yeah. I think about the backlash that took place against the 1619 project, a complete, evisceration, if you will, in the media, especially the right-wing segments, reactionary segments of the media. And they're this talk now of replacing the 1619 project with a 1776 project. So we're seeing now a further entrenchment. I would suppose that the U.S. education system has always been used for indoctrinating young people into kind of a like Noam Chomsky calls it, an education for domestication, a domesticating education, to where people are made into pliable workers and acceptable in the eyes of the free market capitalism. And that has always been the case with the United States education system. But now I'm seeing it as it being done brazenly and out in the open. At least there was kind of a cover or a veil of objectivity, a veil of equality. Now I'm seeing it more of a, we're going to do this and you're going to learn it, and that's all there is to it. So yeah, that's, what are your thoughts on that?
No, you said a word in there that I really like, the reactionary piece to it, especially from the right. I just think like the right, there's such snowflakes, right, to begin with. First of all, they have no real political spine. So I can see why they would definitely, kind of react the way that they would, because, of course, this apartheid regime does not want to be reminded that it is an apartheid regime, so to speak. Now, granted, when it comes to the 1619 project, I think there's a lot to learn, though, about slavery and the expansion of capitalist formations because of slavery that Karl Marx as well kind of talks about. I think they're just really trying to shut down all forms of consciousness, all forms of ways of having awareness to raise, a class consciousness and to really to bring back our labor movements and rebel. So I just think that these reactions is an indication to me that the contradictions within this apartheid regimes are heightened. I mean, it's getting really tense. I even was reading somewhere too that Mitch McConnell somehow was trying to tell his voters that the problem isn't really with the Republican Party. The real problem is with the corporations. So it's just like they're cracking, you know what I mean? And but in regards to just thinking about schools, we have been here before. Like there's the Daughters of the Confederacy, right? Where, they created all these, alternative narratives to the, to the Civil War, and things like that has led to, some of the right-wing militia groups and Trump supporters that we see today. So I think we're going to expect to see another formation, another kind of evolution of this kind of like far right identity. It's just it's full on intellectual fascism. Like, I mean, that's just really was what it's really coming down to. And it's not like we don't know like this history anyways, right? We were taught this in school, right? The 16th, we knew everything about about this country, and now it's just the great remix, right? So it's just, they know they're losing, so it's the best time to strike. So
I want to ask a bit of a broad question, especially when it comes to I guess different ideology. When you talk about Marxism a little bit, you talk about the issues that we face in education system. So my question is, even within Marxism, people will say that he's kind of anti-African, right? So I would want to know what kind of rhetoric or sentiments do you see in the education world that are anti-African? I know this can be a broad question, but as of lately, or just things in general, people should look for. What are some anti-African rhetoric or sentiments that show up in the
I know that's a really great question. Right, there is so many, right? I think that it extends to one extent to how we think about education and how we think about pedagogy, right? And also how we think about just the overall, structures of schools. Like, schools are inherently anti-Black. That's how I really see it. Schools are the intellectual arm of the state. There's just no way about it. And I was a school teacher for like 11 years, so I think that one of the ways that schools are definitely anti-Black or anti-African, of course, in the way that we not only in the way that we teach Blackness or how we teach Black history. That's one way that's also extremely anti-Black for me, and I'll go into that later. But also too, like, just with the policies that shape schooling apparatus within itself, just only exacerbates the issues or dilemmas that we've been born into. I don't mean to be ragging on Marx or whatever, but the thing is, though, is that like, when you do read about how capitalism, when it forms, its institutions are only there to reinforce capitalist relations. So for example, schools or students that kind of go through schools are really being reproduced into their class structure that they've been born into, right? So, that's extremely anti-Black, within that self. But I'm like going all over the place, but I want to get back to this thing of like how we teach Black history. I think is also very anti-Black. That thing. I mean, it really frustrates me about that, because we're only being taught our history through the lens of the white supremacist capitalist patriarchy, right? We're not reading about our rebellions. We're not reading about the ways that we shook things up before. I remember my first year of my PhD program, and we had to read Black Reconstruction. I didn't even read Souls of Black Folks. Like, honestly, like, when I was in school, we just, you did the Black history thing. And it's just one of those ways that, you just have this alienation from your own self. Like, you kind of feel as if you know everything you need to know. And then when I cracked open the book, I was just really upset. Like, I was just like, yo, like, why wasn't I taught this? Like, I grew up conservative, like, my whole life. And like, and this is what this man is talking about. This whole book is chocolate Marxism. I mean, this is what it really is. Like, it's a class analysis on Black experience here. So, and we're not taught that in schools, how things would be different, right? If we were to give our children an education that not only points to the Black radical tradition, but also points to the ways that we encourage children to create new knowledge that comes from the analysis of the Black radical tradition. So that's one of the ways pedagogically that I think it's really anti-Black. And it's just the ways that schools are, I don't know, schools are just really weird to me sometimes. There's a lot of money that goes into schools in order to improve capitalist relationships, but it doesn't really improve the material conditions, of our children. And, that's something that's, it's really frustrating, honestly, the more I think about them things. So, and it's not like schools created the problems that, Black people like find themselves in. Like, schools didn't do that. And that's a whole nother issue. Maybe we can come back to later on, but
Right.
hopefully I answered your question. But
Yeah, definitely. A quick follow up. So there's a statement that the U.S. school system, I think you kind of brushed it, is like a cultural defense mechanism for white hegemony, right? And we've heard Fanon said, among other things, that the duties of the intellectual is to support the aspiration of those that are dominated, the people that are dominated, and force the government to respect the rights of the peoples to self-determination. What do you think about that concept? And then how do you tie in that concept to today intellectuals? Like, why are we in the school systems? Why are we learning these things? And what should we be doing with those intellectual weapons that Asafo talks often?
yeah, no, I like that quote too from Fanon, right? So that's just how powerful, like, knowledge really, really is, right? It has a way of structuring people's awareness and their consciousness in order for, them to do the things that they do, right? I think it was really important here, though. Well, I'm saying, like, for me, like, when I look at the state apparatuses within schools and how it serves capitalist relationships, is at least for me, like, when I'm a teacher, I have to ask, or when I was a teacher, I had to ask myself, all right, what actually counts as education and what counts as, schooling? Because, for me, education means to develop the full potentials of a human being, right? So they can solve the problems that they're facing at this present moment, right? That's what education is. Education can happen at the barbershop, in a freestyle cipher session. Education's happening right now. Education's happening when you're reading books. It doesn't have to be in a school, what I'm saying, all the time, right? So when I think of schooling, I think of schools as being like what Frantz Fanon had described, right? But there is a contradiction within schools. You can definitely have a woke teacher like Asafo or you yourself or whatever that can go into these places and drop some gems on there. But when we wage epistemic violence, within these schools, when we do things like that, that can lead to some serious effects in there. So and so that's how I kind of think about the ways that schools are definitely shape the way that we think. And it's just time for teachers to honestly, I just think that teachers should really start taking things a little bit more seriously about the way that schooling's going. Because I don't think our country, I don't think that this apartheid regime isn't really interested in fixing anything, right? To make things more equitable. I think they're more interested in just quelling rebellions. Honestly, I think they're trying to just smash dissent as much as possible. And so I don't know. I just feel like a lot of times, like, all this money kind of goes into schools and politicians will talk about schools all the time. But the reality is that they try to frame it as if, like, the problems that we're facing in this society is because there's lack of education. No, it's not. Like, it has nothing to do with that. It has everything to do with these policies that these people are creating that to exploit our labor in a larger way. And they just put it on schools. They put it on teachers. And so that makes it really kind of hard, right, to take what Fanon has to say into a real classroom political praxis. So hopefully I answered your question.
I had a quote from Chomsky in this book on miseducation queued up, but I'm gonna come back to that. I'm gonna follow up something you said in previous answer about Black history being taught through the lens of white supremacist capitalist patriarchy. I think one of my, and you tell me what you think about this. One of my critiques that I've always leveled against Afrocentrism is that their approach to history is fundamentally the same approach to Black history as Eurocentrism's approach to white history. So whereas in Eurocentrism you have history covering the great white men, and to a lesser extent the great white women and the great things that they have done. And with Afrocentrism, to a significant extent, you have the great black men, and to a lesser extent, the great black women, and what they have done, and their contributions to great civilizations. You talk about the great leaders of great civilizations like Kemet and Monomatapa and Great Zimbabwe and everything like that. But we never really hear the history, even in Afrocentrism, from the ground up. Am I wrong? Is that a misperception on my part?
You're absolutely right. I mean, right? It's funny that you mentioned that, right? So we take on the lens of our oppressors, right? And it becomes the way that we even look at our own history, right? And and I feel like that kind of phenomenon, like, right, it happens in many different ways in this exact same way, right? It's like their standards for knowledge becomes ours, right? And I agree with you there about not understanding how things were from the ground up, right? Or not even looking at the ways that what were the things that formed these societies, right? Because, I just feel like we just learn facts in a very kind of like a banking model kind of way. Like, all right, this is what this was, this is what this was, right? But it's hard for Black children, I think, when they mature to become adults to really begin thinking concretely about history in that way. We just think about it as these sporadic things of facts, and they're not really connected. And even if you talk to Afrocentrist, people today, or whether they be organic scholars or academic scholars, they're always just coming in with talking about things in abstractions through a white lens. Like, like we're almost reproducing the same thing, in the Black way. I think we got to really start reevaluating what is going to be our standards for how we look towards knowledge, right? Or how we look at history. And thank God, we definitely have scholars that are out there. But that they have to come to where we're at, where the people really are, in terms of really putting this stuff in children's minds, But I agree with you. I think it's well said. Yeah, I think you're right. Absolutely.
Well, I believe that we've always, I'm sure I'm not the only person who's ever said this, but I've always believed that we have a lot of representation among Afrocentrists in historiography, in the social sciences, even in psychology. But we're not seeing a representation among the workers. We're not seeing where are the African-centered construction workers, where are the African-centered plumbers, where are the African-centered, the fellow who works the cash register at McDonald's or Walmart. What is the appeal to that person of Afrocentricity? I'm seeing a lot of peer-reviewed journals. I'm seeing a lot of books. I'm seeing a lot of conferences with dashiki-clad brothers and sisters, dressed up and speaking very intellectually. But I really don't see how that benefits people on the ground level, the masses, the people who are struggling every day in these, in this economic malaise that we find ourselves in.
No, you're right. No, you're absolutely right. I want to say, and maybe I'm being too presumptuous here, but when we're really good storytellers, right? When you look at plantation societies, and things like that, I mean, we were really, really good storytellers, right? But it's through these stories, though, that we gain knowledge about how to, get out of the situations that we're in, right? So I think, I agree with you, right? We do need to continue to understand, as well as for people that we want to reach that don't have maybe the access to these kinds of knowledges that we're talking about, though. They just need that, they need that, but that builds better stories. So I don't know if I'm making sense, but I'm just trying to say, in a way, when you were mentioning about people who are on the ground, the people on the ground as well have awesome potential to create knowledge and education, at that, right? Even on that kind of level, right? They're also parts of history too. So I just feel like, I don't know, there's this mythological creature I like called Anansi, who's always weaving things together. I think that that has to be the archetype, for our people in regards to, creating knowledge and making more connections and things like that. Because clearly, people, whether it be in academia or the, you know, the Afrocentrist people, they're writing for an audience, man. They're not really writing for us. Like, you know, they're not writing for the black construction worker or my black barber or, you know, my favorite storyteller, the woman who does my hair. Like, you know, like they're not interested in that. And there's a contradiction in there too for me, but you know, you're absolutely right. I just think that we got to start weaving these things together, you know. So yeah.
I want to play off that question a little bit, especially as it pertains to history and how history get passed down. And you mentioned storytelling, right? And so quite often, especially as it comes to education and other social arrangements, many people talk about integration. It's like, oh, it really hurt us. Integration hurt us, and we was better off this way. And you know, these things. And a lot of times I hear it is regurgitated. They probably lacking a lot of nuance, cultural, historical, political context. And I'm not sure that everybody understands the challenges that we were trying to overcome at that point, right? So my question is, based off your studies, your experiences, what's your thoughts on this concept of integration versus separation, and then our nationalistic pursuits?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. Because like sometimes I do get like really frustrated, like when I hear, you know, other Africans or black people kind of say that. I think, and this is where I try to have more compassion, I think, for other black folks. There is unconsciously this need to have maroonage of some sort, right? They're like, right, we know things are structurally wrong. The problem is that we make myths that are just outdated and we keep on saying these same old myths, right? So the myth that somehow like we just need to, you know, separate or whatever. But the reality is you can have separation, you can have integration. It's still an apartheid regime, right? You know, so I am still trying to gather more stories, trying to understand exactly what was the state of education maybe before integration. But, you know, from what the things that I have been reading, at least here in Cincinnati after like Civil War, we did have a lot of segregated schools. There was a lot of good scholarship, right, that happened within these schools, but they were still heavily underfunded. And I don't think it was like an issue of like of the fact that somehow these schools were just bad or whether it was like horrible teachers or whatever and things like that. I just think that schools, I think segregation, people wanted it, like a lot of our people probably wanted it so that way they can have more access to the cultural values and ideas and norms in society in hopes that, you know, maybe they could kind of come up if they were just only in a white school, right? Like versus, you know, being, you know, within, you know, certain black schools, depending on like which class zones of blacks that you're talking about too. I think it's really important. So that's just what I know in general about Cincinnati, at least after Civil War. That's like the kind of ethnography and story collections I like to really do. But I think as African people today, we have to really look into the abyss. I had to do that. I do that every day, right? On thinking that we might think things can be, this is kind of like there's options, right? That we can, you know, definitely somehow have this kind of massive maroonage or whatever, or make the whole southern block of the United States, like South Carolina, Georgia, into like this territory. It's regimes, man. Like, you know, they have army bases like everywhere else. Like, what makes you like, you know what I mean? Like, you know, like check your myths, like, you know, really debate yourself with these things. And I think there is a visceral reaction, you know, when you definitely tell black folks that. I just think that's just that unconscious response of being internally still a slave and not trying to go down the Afro pessimism route. But we have to be really honest about our concrete situation here and not blame us for it. So I think national, I mean, I am a Pan-Africanist, right? So anything that's for the material conditions for my people, I'm totally down. But having something separate here in the United States, it didn't even work out for the white folks in the Civil War. So I don't understand, like, you know, why would you, come on, dog, like we can put our minds together for something else. So
right. I'm glad that you talked about the political climate of the apartheid regime within this separation, because we have to be aware that even when separation, if they're choosing who are educating us, we'll get a Coleman Hughes in front of us instead of Dr. Jared Ball, right? And so let's not act like we had a Dr. Jared Ball and Amos Wilson in our classrooms. We had Coleman Hughes, Candace Owens, and some other shit. So I'm glad that you said that.
that Candace Owen bit was funny. Yeah.
All right, so that, I want to kind of veggie back off of what Geechee just asked you about this point of separation and what have you. So what does that portend for the debate that we've had over the years? Educational activists are been steeped in this debate between reform within the system of education and reform within the system of education and complete national Pan-African institution building under this regime. I've always felt that, me personally, I've always felt that I'm inclined to support any effort at independent institution building. But there's a huge caveat there. I don't think we really take into consideration the economic misery that most of our people are in, to the point where, 2 points really. We don't take into consideration, even like when you talk about homeschooling or what have you, things like that. Most of our people have to work. They have to leave the house to go and work and try to make money to keep a roof over their children's heads, to put food on the table, and to make ends meet. They don't really have the time or the energy or the ability really even to stay at home to ensure that their children are being homeschooled properly and what have you. My second objection, if you want to call it that, would be the fact that we, as Black workers, we put millions, even billions of dollars into this system, and I'm not comfortable with any plan that tells us to leave billions of dollars on the table and continue paying the billions of dollars while we're going to take scrape together pennies to educate our children over here, while we're leaving billions with them. So essentially, we're just going to be giving them money and they're educating their children off our dime while we're taking pennies to educate our children. It's something like that just doesn't fit right with me. What do you think about that?
Ooh, yeah, that is real. Definitely thinking about the seriousness of our material conditions. And, you're absolutely right. Our parents are working and they experience alienation from their jobs, right? And, so there's emotional, a disconnect and even trying to believe in something like that. I mean, that's how this system breaks down human will in a lot of different ways, right? And I would definitely have to, agree with you there that there are definitely these kind of challenges. I honestly think it is time for a Black-led working class movement. It just has to be, right? Like we're scraping by pennies, right? But yet we contribute to the wealth here, and we are the most exploited labor class besides the indigenous folks and immigrant class, things like that here. But we're still picking cotton through our labor, with those things like that. And so I think that when I hear people say we have to think about building Black infrastructure within Black communities, I don't think that's ever happened. I think Reconstruction history kind of proves us that, right? That definitely that the need to build infrastructure is totally warranted, right? And they did that, by expanding education, and things of the like. So I just think that, and maybe I had to really think more about that actually, but maybe it is time for. Well, definitely we know that when it comes down to building our own thing, I have a lot of concerns about that. Like for one, how much of your apparatus and your management of how you build this school is just reflective of, you know, how school systems operate within themselves, right? So I have a real issue, you know, around things like that. But I don't know if I answered your question there.
No,
But yeah, okay.
You know, I appreciate your response. When you said that about building our own school, the immediate thing that popped into my mind was Umar Johnson. I think Umar Johnson represents a cautionary tale. Either one of two things are true with Umar Johnson. Either one, he's a con artist who used black talk to rip millions of black people out of their money. Or two, he stands as a living, almost paradigmatic example of why it's just almost impossible, really, to scrape together black pennies in order to build the type of education system that he's talking about building. So either way, his example proves a very valid point, you know, for me.
Yeah, we don't have the money. Like we simply don't have the money to do the kinds of things that we're putting on our black wish list. Like, you know what I mean? I think I just think that those things have to be really centered around a deeper class analysis, like as to, you know, that what you have said, you know, because I think unconsciously, right, when people kind of think about, all right, we're just going to do for self, build this stuff up, boom, 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 without a class analysis. I think what ends up happening is that black folks end up blaming themselves, or they end up blaming the kind of like the movement, and not to say like, you know, Umar Johnson doesn't deserve like criticism. He definitely does, right? That's not what I mean there. But I just think that there is this kind of brokenness within our own pursuits that we end up creating more wish lists instead of just actually just being serious about the ways that our labor is just being exploited, you know? So yeah, but there's no money.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Geechee, I just want, go ahead, you go ahead.
Oh, no, I was gonna say, whenever you say class analysis, like, and I'm hearing this, and I'm hearing how it translates in the community and online or whatever. And, you know, you mentioned about African pessimism. People, when we say class analysis, that means like thinking, studying, dialogue, and more. And it's like, people, I'm tired of talking. Let's just get to work. And all y'all doing is talking to complain. And it's like, both is equally important. And I think what I'm hearing is, if we're going to create solutions, then we should be truthful, scientific, logical, right? We should have all those things in play, because we're being attacked at, you know, every side, right? And so when we think about, you know, policy wise, and I wanted to bring this up. So when Bloomberg and Buttigieg was running, they was making statements that insinuated, and one of them flat out said that Black families lack the experience to understand the importance or the value of education, right? And although you can look at peer review and you can look at other data and research to show that these cats don't know what the hell they're talking about, I want to know from you, when ignorance like that is put out, even though it's refuted, right? But you have to read and study and see that's refuted. When ignorance is put out like that, what is happening when things like that is being publicized, right? When you think about all of the issues that we have, the things that we know, the things we don't know, how we feel about ourselves, blaming ourselves, when stuff like that hits public space, what is happening in those moments when those things are publicized?
Yeah, that's a really good point and a really good question. You know, when I first heard about it, I was obviously like infuriated, right? Because not true, right? I mean, you know, but at the end of the day, I think that is a way for the fascist group class, right? Whether it be Democrats or Republicans, I think that is a way, again, kind of going back to that same point I was mentioning about how, in order to mask the inequalities, right, of this apartheid regime, there needs to be an institution to kind of scapegoat it. And I think that that ultimately like goes into education, right? So there's two things going on here, right? The underlying the hidden message is that, you know, education is a solution, but the contradiction really is that education did not create the problems that are not yet. They didn't create the problems. Yeah, they didn't create the problems. Nor can education alone solve the problems that this apartheid regime produces. Right? That it just can't do that. Because if it did, gosh, I got multiple degrees, but I'm still in debt. Right? So like there's nothing happening there, or there's you have access to education, but a lot of people still can't find work. So the issue is not even that within education, right? So then the next thing though is that like when it collapses onto blackness, it just reinforces this whole inferiority thing, right? I think that what ends up happening is that I think it gets into the minds of teachers, that it's somehow because teachers themselves maybe they don't understand the real realities of what Black children are really kind of going through. So that further cements these Black inferiorities in terms of like this inferiority complex in terms of how even teachers think about like, with Black children. And I think at the end of the day, it's just still continuing some of these inferiority like myths and complexes about like there's something wrong with us, right? And there really isn't anything wrong with us at all. Just like what W.B. Du Bois said, like in Souls of Black Folks, right? One of my favorite books. It's instead of thinking about as Black people are problems, why can't you just think about them as people who are facing problems that they didn't create, that they just didn't create. But what's really sad though is that in the ways in which we believe sometimes that there is something wrong with us, right? And people say this thing like it's for the culture and all these other things, but they subscribe to some of those things like that politician was mentioning that is that you're not doing this hard enough. When reality is that we've done all we can. Like what more do you really want? So that's how I honestly kind of took it. Yeah. I don't know. What do you all think?
I think one of the things just in general, when you think about the schooling and apartheid, and also again it being a mechanism to protect white hegemony, it's going to produce people out there that don't think and don't research and don't, you know what I mean? Like that's just not going to be a thing. And so when pundits or whoever the hell these entertainers want to be, when they say things, it's axiomatic at that point. So I think more weapons. I think you said something earlier, but more weapons to spread misinformation is horrible. But we have to find creative ways to counter those things where we'll force people to think and study and read and stuff like that.
And this is why I think like, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, you're right.
Go ahead. Finish your point.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was just going to say like, and this is why I think we have to think about education outside of schools, right? Like, start like having more public spaces and it's hard to really do, but I think that that kind of like educational maroonage, it has to be about creating spaces where we can have critical dialogue and then call out the contradictions that we see out there. Like, right, because they're splitting Black consciousness every time politicians say these things. The double consciousness of our people, our awareness has always been split. So it's splitting even more when the racial regime itself is being split. We saw what happened in, January 6th and things like that. And, they're just trying to put it together on our own consciousness, right? So like, we're the ones getting the brunt ends of their own mistakes and stuff like that. So.
Yeah,
that's all.
What I was going to say was we've seen the horrifying thing about it is that we've heard in Black spaces, we've heard similar things being said, and it's always regarding oh, we just need more education, oh, we need to pull ourselves up, oh, we need to we need to stop spending above our means, or we need to pool our resources. We just hear a plethora of things that mimic what we're hearing from the most reactionary elements of this, racist system, capitalist system. And it's mimicry, and it really makes me nervous with this whole talk of being on code, because there's a certain being this demand, this declaration, if you will, that we need to be on code brings with it an unspoken specter, if you will, that no, you just need to follow uncritically. And that's why I'm nervous about it. That's what ultimately makes me nervous about it. Because, we're in America, we have a mindset. I think America, like people who live in America in general, because we've been so beat down mentally through propaganda, we have this idea just to follow uncritically, just this unthinking obeisance to the authority. And invariably what we're having among even our African-centered elders, don't make me name names because I will, but even among our so-called African-centered elders is this demand for Black people to be on code to the point where we're just not thinking critically. Even, whereas this kind of worshipful obedience, mindless obedience to the system of white supremacy, we don't want you to get rid of that worshipful obedience. We want you just to be worshipfully obedient to the Black elder or the Black leader of the organization or the what have you. So yeah, I mean, there's always this specter of a lacking in critical thought that we're even seeing in Black space. My last quick point, we're being told to be on code like white folks are on code. There's this whole thing about being on code like the white folks. We don't need to be on code like the white folks because, if you look at, there's a great book that I will recommend that you two read, even the people who are watching. There's a great book called Dying of Whiteness by Jonathan Metzl. And he talks about how you have white folks. He doesn't use the words on code, but there's this racial solidarity that is actually ruining the lives and the quality of life of white folks. And when I having read that book and understand that that in whiteness, in the white race, the powerful white people are basically stepping over the working class and poor white folks in order to have the power that they have. In fact, white folks, the white working class, are sacrificing themselves at the altar of whiteness in order for the white power structure to be what it is. And we're having our Black leaders telling us we need to be like that. And I'm vehemently against that.
Facts, all facts. Yeah, I mean, I like what you had to say. The follow uncritically, right? That is really interesting though about this thing on code. I hear that a lot too. In my community out here, and they kind of use it in a way of race first. Of course, we know you got to think about your your people, of course, right? But it's the fact that we're not engaging in critical dialogue about those things, right? So we've lost, I feel like, I don't want to say we lost it, but I feel like our traditions of being critical, with each other in order to, I'm always saying, to put our minds together. I think it doesn't really happen a whole lot. We're not co-creating new stuff together, right? We're just regurgitating old things like, oh, you're saying that, I agree with that. Yeah. And it's just like this constant back and forth regurgitation of old myths that, and old belief systems, kind of Booker T. Washington kind of stuff. No diss on Booker T or whatever. But, there is a problem with that, in general, we're not really being engaged. We don't even debate ourselves against our own history sometimes, right? So it's just that we have to really get back into Black radical scholarship. We got to really kind of get back into them things. And you're absolutely right though, especially the ways that white folks, right, they have their own contradictions and their own problems of being on code. I feel like a lot of times that on code thing is really being propagated and disseminated, especially with this whole the whole celebrity culture kind of thing, and also to the ways in which these newscasters on CNN or whatever, they almost act as if they're the spokesperson for Blackness, right? And we need to be on code with them, right, on the mass kind of level thing. And that's just really kind of disturbing though, because That's why I have the same frustration as you, but I share that same frustration in that kind of like domain, right? Like these gatekeepers of this is what blackness is, this is what the standard is, and you got to be on code on that. Like even if it's like the Unc right thing, it's like the same thing, right? You got to be on code with that, but it's never about like how do we name our experience as a people or a community, right? How are we naming this? You know, like to start off with questions like that, and then like where have we seen this before? And what are some ideas of reaching back into the past that, you know, that we can learn from? And that's where the Black radical tradition kind of comes in there for me. But I'm with it, though. Yeah, this whole on code stuff, I never got it. I don't know what that is. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't do everything that other, like most Black folks do. Some think that that'll be non-Black, some of the stuff, you know, that I do or whatever. You know, it's just we're causing our own hegemony, right, within our own people, and that's just not our people.
Right.
Well, that's what we need. I think what we need to understand is that most of the philosophical or the end game of what is being asked for of the masses of Black people is basically to replace one oppressive regime with another oppressive regime. You know, we're being told to say, okay, well, rather than your landowner, your landlord, your boss, your employer who's exploiting you for $7.25 an hour, rather than all of them being white, let's have all of them as Black. And people really see that as Black power.
Right. Right.
You know?
So we're gonna be wrapping up pretty soon. So share this on YouTube or Facebook. Get your questions in as we wrap up. And I kind of want to stay in that area of what Asafo said, because I mean, again, if we're really critically thinking, I want to say the majority. I don't want to use that word, but a lot of people are really, like you said, is replacing it. Like, okay, this man is beating your ass. Wouldn't it be better if I beat your ass? Like, I'm Black. Like, it's kind of insane. So we hear Black capitalism. We hear the I don't want to say second wind, but the reconfiguration of concepts of Black capitalism, and it being dressed up in African-centered garb, kente cloths, Black sex power, and emotionally engaging employees. I mean, not employees. I'm calling them employees because they really are celebrities, right? They're engaging. You know, they write a book and Cardi B's writing the forward, or whatever the case may be. My question is, when we're thinking about education, there's conservative education, and there's revolutionary education. There's colonialist education, neo-colonialist education, and revolutionary education. How can we be sure? How can we be sure that we are not teaching a neo-colonialist education and theoretically having Black teachers teach white hegemony?
Yeah, no, that's a good question, right? The whole idea of like the oppressed become the oppressors, right? Something that Paulo Freire talks about, you know, like in Pedagogy Oppressed. You know, actually, I have this copy. Here's the original copy. One of my first copies I had. I got a funny story with that. But anyways, no, that's a really good question. I think if people are going to talk about Black capitalism, people have to know. People have to know what capitalism really is. Okay, I grew up in a very Black Republican household. In fact, in my city, they had this like little Boy Scouts, I guess you might want to say, for conservatism. So we learned and read all these things from Thomas Sowell and all that other stuff. Trust me, I was in that stuff. Could not tell you how capitalism worked. Couldn't tell you how to be critical of it. Couldn't even define it. And it's the same thing like these, like our family members out there and our friends and other weird people or these weirdos that are promoting this and that or whatever and talking about how capitalism is, but they can't even define what it is, like, you know, and you know, and that's a problem, like, right? So if I'm like, you know, I think you have to teach everything critically, like, I don't care what it is, you know, we have to really show these things, but I think it really speaks to the point that we're doing exactly what Asafo's talking about, right? Critically or not critically, following uncritically, right? And I think that, we see that kind of phenomenon taking place within these retellings of these myths, like, of the ways that, Black capitalism has to work. We do this and this and work hard. And, I just feel really frustrated, and I feel really sad. I mean, I really do sometimes, because when I see people doing gig economies and things like that, some people actually think that they call themselves entrepreneurs, right? By, doing something like that. But the reality is that, like, no, you're like, that's just contracted labor. And then, they even thinking about how the establishment of a Black business is somehow is the gateway to success and things like that. I don't think that's true. One story that I often tell was that my mother, she didn't go to college. She started her own business. She was a baker. Like, that's all she did. She literally transformed the first floor of our house, into a bakery shop to support all of us. And I was working for some time, but she couldn't compete with this local chain group out here called Buskins. So she ended up having to sell some of her recipes, to this large local Cincinnati chain called Buskins, right? So anytime you come up to Cincinnati, you get the chestnut pie, the pound cake, the lemon meringue pie. Those are my mother's recipes, so and we don't tell those stories. And what's really sad too is it's like this whole idea of, like, we make it to the top and then we sell. Like, we have to sell out. We have to, it's just like, like, is that what we're like, what are we really doing? Like, and it's I have a very emotional reaction, obviously, right? To these particular things. One of the ways I'm really trying to work with other Africans here in Cincinnati, at least, and trying to build class consciousness, to talk about the ways that, show me the data where this actually works. So, like, in Cincinnati, right, they came out with this publication that said, after the George Floyd thing, when we was rebelling down here, they said this thing like, Cincinnati Black businesses contribute to, $13 billion annually to the general revenue here in Cincinnati, right? And everybody thought it was cool, right? Like, it was cool. But then when you compare the numbers of what Black people contribute in context to the overall GDP that the city actually creates, it's like less than it's like 1.3%, bro. Like, like that's nothing. But, like, people are getting really hyped about that, like, as if they about to do something. And it's just like, nah, man, like, we're being screwed. Like, so I don't like the Chamber of Commerce in any city, at all. I don't like the ways in which we are essentially being complicit with being oppressed by people that look like us. I would like to see more cooperatives, honestly, more Black-owned worker industries than I would than to see silly Black businesses. They're not paying my homeboy or one of my good friends well on their money, right? And things like that. And I mean, come on, like, come on, y'all. Like, there's just other things out there that we have done. If you look back at the farming cooperatives that we created in the Deep South in Alabama, under an anti-capitalist party, so it's just, we just have to really just be critical. But I think that the slave master is really alive in a lot of Black folks' heads. Like, that's a real complex, man, because some guys are ready to really go to blow, if you talk about things kind of like that. Because I think it's because we don't want to feel as if it's our fault again, when in reality it's not. Like, it's not your fault. It's just not. But you do become a part of the problem. I mean, when you subscribe to some of these capitalist ideas. So I know I said a lot there. I was feeling it.
No, thank you.
So in the last few minutes we have left, could you share with us, based on your work in the education system and your expertise? Now I'm looking at your bio. You've taught school in different parts of the world, right? Taiwan, and there are other places as well. So my question is, if you could, with your experience and your expertise in this area, could you share with us some, I guess, of some policies that you would think would go the farthest in kind of rolling back, the racial capitalism and rolling back the entrenchment of economic exploitation of the Black community?
Right. Yeah. No, that's a good question. It's a question I'm always trying to to really find answers to a lot of ways. When I was doing my master's program, I was kind of like interested in that kind of a question. But I think what needs to happen, at least for me, is that we have to connect the issues facing education to a large connected to the broader issue of just the decline of infrastructure, right? So we have all these policies, like even educational policies, No Child Left Behind and all sorts of policies, right? They're really just promoting, it's a part of a larger system of global austerity, right? So they're trying to continue to privatize the public sector, and in doing so, we're being under the real dictatorship, right, of the fascist capitalists, right? So there isn't really like this public goods, right, is becoming just more and more privatized. So one of the things that some of the things I've always been thinking about is having that Black-led labor movement to be centered on resisting against these neoliberal cutting of public funds, kind of austerity measures, that we see being taken place almost everywhere, right? I mean, yes, our condition is really bad, but I also just want to say is that everybody's feeling it, right? But like when we feel it like for real, right? And so I think that just because of where we're located, I think that because we know how this whole system animates, because it animates off of our oppression, I just think that we just have to have a very anti-neoliberal response that is centered around putting our workers first, centered around building up human infrastructure that is supportive to Black life, because when that happens, everybody eats, right? I mean, it just does, right? And that's the crazy thing that these politicians just want to say. They want to tell us like, yo, your issue can't not just be for Blacks, it's got to be for all. But what the reality is that like when it is for us, because we are at the bottom, it becomes that way for all, and that's what Reconstruction was about. So, so those are the things I'm still kind of thinking through. I'm also thinking about certain like models of schooling that might look kind of different. So, I've been always thinking about how schools, it's kind of like how it is at the job, teachers are laborers of knowledge, right? And they don't really like own the means of knowledge productions in the schools. They're just doing what they're told, right? They don't, very strange ways or very limited ways that like a lot of teachers actually, have a say about, kind of like the content that really kind of goes into the curriculum. What would it look like, right? To have a real community school that is owned by the teachers, ran by the teachers, and, and the people have some sort of bureaucratic say within those lines, right? So this whole hierarchy between I'm the authority and you're the teachers, what would it look like really if the power dynamics were more shared, right, across the group? Because I think a lot of teachers, and I know I'm friends with a lot of teachers who are Black and white or whatever, they always talk about like, yeah, we need something kind of like holistic. We need some holistic education, something for real change. But the reality is, can you really do that when you don't own really the means of knowledge production like within the school? So that's a lot of what my research is really looking at, is like, how do you take that anti-capitalist like framework and then mapping that on into schools, because schools are set up in a very capitalist formation anyways. Just look how the chairs are set up, and it's kind of like, I don't care, even if they're in a circle, they don't matter, right? Or even if you're doing mindfulness every day, right? Like you still experience alienation from your role as a teacher, because you're teaching to the tests. And so instead of teaching to the creation of knowledge. So I'm just trying to explore different models. So if anybody's interested and want to, whatever, chat with me or something like that, I'll be glad to reach out to you. My email's there. So hopefully answer your question.
So tell me this, I would assume that pedagogy of the oppressed is required for anybody who even think anything about education. But what's some other materials, readings that you suggest people study, especially when we talk about policy and actually getting your mind right to develop policy? What are some other required readings or studies?
Right. No, that's a really good question. I think in terms of like think about policy, I haven't come across any really good books about like like a very kind of like a anti kind of like capitalist kind of thing about policy and things like that. Wait a minute, I'm lying. I got the book, y'all. It just hit me. All right, there's this really good book by a Marxist educator named Jean Agnon. I'll go ahead and put it here. Jean Agnon, I think that's her name. She's no longer with us, but she has this book called Ghetto Schooling. And so she talks about how schools are like ghetto schoolings are really just there to serve as buffers, and it reproduces these class issues that we see. Right. I think you can't go wrong with Jean Agnon. She's probably, in my opinion, like one of the best scholars when it comes to some of the politics that we're kind of talking about. And she also has another book called Marx in Education, which is extremely a really good book. I know there's some other people out there, and there's also this book called Revolutionary Pedagogy. It's written by I forgot his name. He teaches at Temple. He's an elder brother though, elder guy. I forgot his name, but that's a really good book. I'm supposed to be getting that. I lost it. Yeah, but go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
I would recommend also the one of the American disciples of Paulo Freire, Henry Giroux.
You know what's really funny? He's Go ahead. Sorry. Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, he's written a lot of great work on the social and political context.
That's
and
right.
the neoliberalization of public education.
That's right.
And the academic industrial complex and what have you. So he does a lot of great work. I'll type his name in as well.
Yeah, no, he's really great. In fact, here's a funny story, right? So where I'm doing my doctoral studies right now was where he was exiled to, right? He was exiled to this school. It's him. Peter McLaren is another guy that came out of the critical pedagogy tradition. It was basically all these Paulo Freirean people, right? So the program that I'm in actually was designed by like those group of people there. And I cannot believe I didn't even think of like suggesting them. But yeah, Henry Giroux is he's fire. We need more black folks like him. Maybe that'll be
also also Donaldo Macedo. Donaldo Macedo as well. He does pretty good work. So we'll we can we can have you come back and do just like the whole hour of dedicated to bibliography.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be great. I love the field. It's just it's a really cool field. I think it'll be great. And it'll be great to have schools be modeled after their kind of work, right? And yeah, it's just great. Yeah.
So do we want to? I think we could spend a little bit. Let's go to 15 and get some questions from the audience. I think I have just one more question. I don't know if you have any more questions, Asafo.
Well, yeah. Well, we just started talking. I didn't even get to the questions I had on the list. So we just.
See, that mean he got to come back for a second question. So, brother Rodney asks, would we or have we sold out to suppose financial security? So I guess this, what do you call it? Generational wealth, getting the bag, and all these things. Do you feel like, despite education, despite the social context, individuals have kind of sold out to this concept of I'm going to get financial security in an unsecure economy.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that I think that it's out of desperation just because of like where we're at and our economic situation, and again, like we're not being really critical of the ways that no matter how hard we work with our best efforts under capitalism, it just doesn't work for us. So yeah, so I think I want to call it like maybe not a sellout, but just being unaware of really how this system really kind of works. I don't know. The sellout thing is just a little different for me. Because there is no financial security for us. Like even if we did it anyways, even if we sold out, it just isn't.
Right. Got that. Okay.
You want to let's get the question here.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with the Sudbury model? Check it out. All students and staff vote on everything. It is fascinating. There is one here in Baltimore called the Arts and Ideas School. I may send my younger daughter there. And that's from Kate Hollander.
Yeah. I'm curious who is presenting the content or curriculum that they get to vote on, right? So for instance, if you're like George Bush or Barbara Streisand, so I'm curious on how that's brought to them, because it's cool for them to vote, but I wouldn't put our kids in a position to figure it out for themselves. So do you have Prince or Asafo recommending things and they can decide from what they recommend? So I'm curious about that part, but Prince, I don't know if you know about.
Yeah, I don't know about that either. I mean, I do. I love the idea of people putting their minds together and going through the democratic process to be critical about things and decide on things. Says students drive their own interests. I mean, I think those things are pedagogically cool, but does it really? Are we teaching our children to transform the material conditions that they're going to be born into? Right. That's all I'm saying. I think those things are great. I practice some of those things as well in my classroom, but not like no curriculum. I think in a way you have to have a curriculum. In a way, you have to have something to guide. I mean, even the word curriculum means to run the course, right? So, right. So you need to have that kind of pedagogy going. I think the problem is that like we don't see how I would rather see models where it says students, how do we students and parents and things like that, how do we drive the curriculum where we're all collectively kind of like creating knowledge like together and things like that. And I did that like the last semester or the last quarter of my school where I worked at, and I wasn't asked to come back. So but yeah, so no, I think those things are great, but
Yeah. No, I'm cool. I just get nervous when that and you could try this out. I've challenged people to do this. Go to any hood and ask the people about the circulating of black dollar versus the Jewish dollar. And if they begin to tell you that, oh, this is 6 hours and this is then they're probably not in a position to choose what they need to be studying, right? And so again, I don't, I'm all for autonomy, but that's probably not a good idea. I don't know. What is this? Witten?
I'll pull it up.
Oh, okay. It'd be great if black college athletes stopped supporting. I saw that. This is kind of the second time I think that she said something about that. But I mean,
we're gonna kick it to you. Gonna kick it to you, Brother Prince. What you say?
I don't know. All right. So for my undergrad, I went to Xavier University, and that's where David West was from. So like, I actually, got to know David West, and I was really surprised to come to find out that he is like now he's like radicalized now, right? So he's trying to do this thing where basically where college basketball players can somehow, share the wealth and things like that. So so there's one thing, right? Black college athletes stop supporting the NCAA, but I mean. For most like athletes, like, people like David West, who I know or I knew of or whatever, some of them thought like that was their ticket into wealth and things like that. Right. So I don't know if it would be great or not. I have to really kind of, think about that. I'm not really too sure. But again, yeah, I feel like it's kind of leaning more towards if we just did our own thing, and that kind of like, I don't know, that's a tough one there. I'm trying to really figure that one out. But
well, I mean,
mm.
I'll say this: it's not something that I've really thought too much about with the NCAA and what have you, college sports in general. But I would like to. I know that there is an emerging effort or popularizing, if you will, of unionizing efforts on college campuses. And I think to the extent that the NCAA athletes can start doing that, and not only for them to receive pay or better pay, or even to influence policy when it comes to universities and colleges that are under the NCAA purview, if you will, something like that. I think it would be a good thing, to form unions and go on strike. We don't have enough black students at these different universities, so we're going to strike until this university system, I don't know, implements policies to bring more black students into the school or something like that. I'm just throwing ideas out.
I think that'd be beautiful if obviously if the group is politically educated and organized in a way that something like that can happen. I think that would be beautiful. I wouldn't definitely disagree with that. I want to ask this last question, especially because of that suggestion about Sudbury or Sudbury model. And so it's kind of unorthodox, but it comes back. So black kids and other kids probably shouldn't be receiving the same education, contrary to what we might hear. Like, oh, everybody, education is equal and neutral and universal and all these words. But if we are to teach black kids a revolutionary education, and the thrust is to teach them conservative or liberal or neoliberal or whatever, my question is, how would you advise progressive white people who desire to be allies to engage inside this, creating a solution or being a part of a solution for black kids? Because again, this is how we do this in Mayberry, and you guys should try this here with the black kids because it works in Mayberry. Like, how do you advise allies to like, this is what we try and do, and this is probably how you can help or show up?
That's a really cool question. I think white allies, just as much as black teachers, really need to understand how the larger economic system created the conditions that their school find themselves in. I think that a lot of teachers spend a lot of time doing curriculum planning and lesson planning, but they should also be doing more of the pedagogical stuff too, like reading some of the things that Asafo was talking about. Like, I mean, when I was a teacher, I used to always hang out with friends after work. We go down to that one spot and kick and talk up for hours and talk about nothing but how difficult our job was, like, right? But we're never like reading things together, right? And things like that. So I think that would be a really good way, I think, for teachers to start, thinking about these things, because the reason why I say like it's really almost a moral imperative to begin really, examining some of the ways that educational policies kind of create the crisis that black students find themselves in these particular schools, is because that once they have the class analysis down, they can be able to better to respond to actual class analysis and not respond to it like, be white just like me, right? Or do these things like that, right? Because this is what I like about the book, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, right? Is that like, it's an idea of how do you create a curriculum that allows space for students to name the experience and also to respond to the experience, right? How and then how can students begin to interpret the world around them, right? So and this is why I think this book is almost like a really good guide, right? And to how to actually to do that. Teachers, especially white teachers, they really need to get themselves out the way and let the pedagogy just do its work. All right. So I think that goes for black teachers as well, who have the inferiority thing in their head. I was that teacher for a while. I'm not even going to front. And, every year I had to become more conscious of those things. So I think we have to really like, you know, you talk about Marcedo and all his books, right? I think we have to really think about what we mean by curriculum and how do we pave this road for our students, right? What can be taught in the classroom that allows them to respond to the conditions that they're going to face out there? Because we're just teaching them how to be white and how to be good workers, right? So, and that's just it.
Mm-hmm. So with with that, I think we're gonna go ahead and wrap up. Unless Geechee, you have anything you wanted to say?
No, I don't. It looks like somebody was commenting in one of the sessions, but it wasn't coming up. But last question, I promise. Any advice for struggling homeschool families?
I don't know. I always kind of collapse back into the cooperatives kind of a thing. I wonder if there's a way for them to get in touch with like other homeschool families somehow and build some kind of network. I know there's an Afrocentric community here in Cincinnati that does a really good job in creating basically a real learning community. I don't think they realize what they're doing, but their model is a way in which they help each other out. They literally go to other homeschool families, and it's all in one centralized place, which is really cool. And because again, like Asafo was talking about, right? To homeschool is really hard, especially when you're poor working class, right? Like it's extremely hard. So I think that's one of the ways that might be a potential where an alternative schooling site might be, or an educative site could kind of come forward. So I just say reach out, build and connect, do that Anansi thing, and start weaving these knowledges together. And something's definitely going to come up because that's how our people always move. Whenever we come together, stuff happens. So
do you have any as we wrap up, do you have anything last words you want to share with the audience, or we have your email down there. If people want to get in touch with you, they can. Anything else you would like to say as we wrap up, brother?
Really, I just think that what you all are doing here is something I think that really needs to happen on every block, right? Like I think we got to really start harnessing the power of knowledge and turn that into a real weapon. But like in order for that to really happen, I think we have to start really debating ourselves against histories. I think we have to really, really start reading real Black history and try to find a way to get out of these narratives that we believe about ourselves that aren't necessarily true. Start reading, the Black radical tradition stuff. Anything on Black Power Media, you can't go wrong. Like, yo, I'm learning. That's like a seminar. Like every day, I'm learning something. Why am I paying to go to school, bro? Like, I mean, these people are killing it. Like, so yeah, that's what I want to say. Get on Black Power Media and get some people together and then start building Black Power Media. Yeah, and then spaces like y'all. That's it.
Yeah. Shout out to Jared Ball and the team, man. They doing a job. Yeah.
Hey,
Renegade culture.
We're trying to grow. We're trying to build our we're trying to stay in our little lane. We're Bush League compared to Black Power Media, but we're trying to do our little thing. And with that said, I want to thank everyone for listening and chiming in. Those who had questions, those who had comments, we appreciate your input. What we have coming up now, every Thursday at 8:30, we have a study group, a Barter and Build think tank study group. Right now, we're reading To Educate a People by Baba Mwalimu Baruti. Okay, so we're doing an 8-week study for that book. Okay. And also coming up, we have a lecture that I'm going to be doing on June the 9th called No, the Ghetto is Not a State of Mind. So we try to do monthly lectures and what have you, have different members of the think tank do monthly lectures. I'll be doing a lecture called No, the Ghetto is Not a State of Mind, where I'm kind of attacking this narrative of the culture of poverty or the poverty mindset, things like that. And I'm, putting together the lecture now. And I think, hopefully that, I can put together, I believe I have the evidence to kind of put that narrative to rest once and for all. Not to be, self-absorbed or presumptuous or anything, but I believe that there's enough evidence just to kill that narrative once and for all. And I look forward to doing so. And after that, our next episode of BABTalk, Barter and Build Talk, will be with Jennifer Schlosser, who is a scholar in criminal justice, and we'll be discussing criminal justice policy. I believe, Geechee, that'll be on the 24th of June. Just want to make sure. We're going to confirm that. We don't want to. It's 24th.
Yeah, 24th.
Okay. Yeah, so we'll be interviewing her on the 24th of June. So we look forward to that as well. So with that said, you want to reach out to the Barter and Build Think Tank brothers and sisters, you can find us online. You can find us on Facebook, and you could go to our YouTube channel. So with that said, we appreciate y'all. Peace.
Peace. Thank y'all.